Witam Państwa bardzo serdecznie na konferencji dla inwestorów i analityków i oczywiście dla mediów. Dzisiejszą konferencję poświęcimy wynikom grupy kapitałowej TAURON za pierwsze półrocze 2021 roku. Ze względu na pandemię nasze spotkanie ma formę
Our meeting is organized in the form of a video conference. We have two hosts today. I would like to welcome CFO Krzysztof Surma, responsible for finance, obviously, and Mr. Jerzy Topolski, Vice President for Asset Management. My name is Łukasz Zimnoch. I'm the spokesperson for TPE. Now, please, ladies and gentlemen, we would like you to have a look at the presentation. It's going to be given in Polish, but translated simultaneously into English. Outside the transmission, after the transmission, it can be replayed in the mode of the conference. We already received the first questions. You can use the form on the transmission's website to ask questions. The first part of the presentation will be given by Mr. Jerzy Topolski. The floor is yours. Ladies and gentlemen, in my part of presentation, I'm going to present the results of the group for the first half and the second quarter of this year as compared to analogous periods in the previous year, and then investment activities of TAURON Group that were carried out in the first half of 2021. If we could focus now on financial results for the first half of 2021, I am happy to inform you that the group's Ebitda has reached almost 3 billion zlotys, which is more by 21% than in the first half of 2020. And the net result is 356 million, which is more than 1,000% more than the analogous period last year. Revenues from sales amounted to more than 11.8 billion, and they increased by 16% as compared to the first half of 2020. Net debt to Ebitda ratio is 2.1, which is quite a safe level. Investment outlays were about, capex was about 1.3 billion, which is a drop by 29%, which I'm going to explain further during the presentation. As for operating data, the volume of distribution of electricity and sales, that's something that should be noted. 9% more in electricity distribution to and customers, and retail electricity supply increased by 4%. As for production of commercial coal, it increased by 8%, and I'm going to develop on this later on. Production from renewable sources dropped, which is quite symptomatic for the first half, but I'm going to develop on that later on in the presentation. Heat production, heat generation increased by 8% in the first half of 2021. If we look at the results of the second quarter as compared to the second quarter of the previous year, we also have increase in revenues from sales by 15%. Ebitda dropped by 18% to the level of 1.2 almost billion zlotys. And at this point, I would like to give a brief comment. Last year, in the second quarter, we released the actuarial reserves, and they actually affected the results in the previous year. It was a one-off event. This year we have not had such events. If we clear this release of provisions event, the Ebitda would be probably higher, more or less by 29%, as compared to the analogous quarter for 2020, apart from this one-off event regarding provisions release. Capex almost 650 million, and net debt to EBITDA again 2.1. As for operating data in the second quarter of 2021, we see what we see here is the events in what is going on in our country are reflected in these data. We see all those phenomena related to increased energy supplies and recovery of the Polish economy after the COVID period. So distribution of electricity is almost 13 terawatt hours, which is higher by 14%. Renewable sources energy dropped by 5%. Electricity production from coal-fired units is increased by 39%. I'm going to discuss it later on. Heat generation, 20% higher. Retail electricity supply higher by 10%, and commercial coal production dropped by 3% to the level of a little bit less than 1.3 million tons. Macroeconomic situation of the group, I think you are well aware of it. It's reflected in the GDP growth rate in Poland and PMI index for Poland, especially in the second quarter of 2021. We can see revival of economy, which has been growing from the end of the last year, which is after the third wave of the pandemic, or in other words, after the third lockdown. CO2 emissions, prices, you know very well the dynamics, probably from January to June, increased by 150% for unit price for CO2 allowances. As for the structure of electricity production, it shows us several phenomena that will accompany us in Polish economy and in the energy sector in particular. We see the energy mix in Poland. We can see an increase in production based on hard coal by 15% as compared to the first half of the previous year. Energy based on lignite increased by 13.6%, and there's a drop of renewable sources derived energy all over Poland. What is it due to? This is the first year from January this year where the rate of winds has decreased significantly as compared to the previous years, which translated into lower production of wind farms, regardless of their location. So we observe this phenomenon all over the country. We observe that in our assets, wind production assets. Water was a little bit better. We have a positive trend as compared to previous years due to higher precipitation level, which is higher as compared to previous years, which allowed us to produce a little bit more energy in water power plants, but it did not compensate for the losses on wind energy. As for lignite and hard coal-fired units, these increases are due to the dynamics of demand for electricity after due to the recovery period, where the needs for the demands for a great amount of electricity is required to recover after the pandemic, and increased level of activity in households, which is related to remote work, to lockdown, where workers would stay at home and work from home. So we can see this tendency of growing demand, which has maintained in households. It has increased all over the country. Another phenomenon is something that we have not observed for many years, namely increase in exports of energy outside the country, so that the balance of exchange, international exchange, is close to zero, or actually slightly with a tendency of us becoming an exporter of energy. That's something we have not observed for many years. This is related to increased demand on one hand, but also the process of phasing out power plants, specifically those based on hard coal in Germany, and announce phasing out of further power generating plants, but also prices. From the beginning of this year, the prices at our neighbors in Germany are quite higher than in Poland, so it encourages imports from Poland. So the price situation related to the dynamics of prices of allowances and the structure of demand resulted in this new phenomenon, where we see increased production from conventional power generating plants all over the country, including TAURON's assets, with a simultaneous drop of renewable sources. Now I would like to give the floor to Krzysztof Surma, who is going to present financial results for particular business lines. Ladies and gentlemen, as Mr. Topolski has said, this is a half of the year of good results. These good results obviously are due to the post-pandemic revival all over the country, both in sales and distribution. We can see it in the revenues. Half year to half year revenues increased by 16%, and they reach almost 12 billion in the first half of 2021. So this increase of revenues from sales is observable in distribution and in retail supply. Net result exceeded 350 million zlotys. It's a significant increase as compared to the first half of the previous year, and it's still affected by impairment losses in the sector of assets related to production and mining, where impairment losses reach 1.1 billion zlotys. As for EBITDA level, we have very good results. Normalized EBITDA half year to half year increased by 30%. Like Mr. Topolski has just said, we had a one-off event related to the release of provisions for the equivalent of energy. This year we had a one-off event on transactions regarding CO2 allowances. They were discussed in the first quarter at the conference. Hence, the increase of EBITDA has increased by more than 500 million zlotys. As for the second quarter, we see a similar tendency, increase at the level of normalized EBITDA of 30%. I've mentioned the impairment losses. They affected the net results for that quarter. As for the revenues, they have increased significantly, both in distribution and in sales. Moving on to particular segments, As always, our main segment and contributor to EBITDA is distribution. But what's also interesting in this first half of the year, this share is a little bit smaller as compared to the whole group, which is quite unusual. In consecutive years, probably it will not be like that, that distribution will be 52% of EBITDA, it will probably be more, but this is due to the fact that we have above normative results in production related to those one-off transactions concerning CO2 allowances that we mentioned in the first quarter. As for Q2, we can clearly see that this segment of distribution has a bigger share in the total of results, and we can still see that generation is still a significant part of the EBITDA achieved, and it's a transfer of results between sales and generation, which I'm going to discuss further in the presentation. Here, if we have a look at a comparison of EBITDA from the first half of 2020 to the first half of 2021, we can see the biggest contribution was that of generation area. But like I said, we had those significant one-off events and the power market implemented this year, but as the negative distribution effect was due to the provision that was released in 2020, like we said, and lack of profitable repurchase of energy from a unit in Jaworzno that was non-operational. As for EBITDA for Q2, all the factors that are significant are quite similar. We can see that the impact, the influence of generation is smaller because the transactions regarding CO2 allowances happened in the first quarter of the year. In the second quarter of the year, there were no such transactions. So the main growth factor were the revenues from the power market. And going further to consecutive segments, like I said before, we have very good results in the distribution area. We have 9% increase of distributed energy volume, which translates into significant increase in revenues. It's a little bit smaller due to decrease of a unit price for off-takers, but the result is positive for distribution. We can see half year to half year that it's a decrease due to this one-off event regarding the provisions that we mentioned, but there's a positive tendency in other services. The consumption of energy by the customers. There's a growth and increase in volumes in all the areas, in all tariffs, A, B, C, and G. We can see this post-pandemic revival in the results of our distribution. As for Q2, we can see identical tendencies to those of the whole half of the year. The result was a little bit affected by this one-off event, namely the dissolution of provisions in the second quarter of last year. As for quality parameters, an important piece of information, all quality parameters achieved by distribution meet the requirements of the president of the energy authority, regulation authority. They're not going to affect the tariffs in the coming years. As for renewables, like Mr. Topolsky said, we had smaller wind rate in this half of the year, specifically during the first quarter. This is due to historically high wind level in 2020, so the benchmark was quite high, and this year we're coming back to normal conditions regarding the level of wind. But hydrological conditions have increased significantly. Energy produced from water, hydro power plants is higher, half year to half year. We also noted increase in prices, which, after balancing the poorer volumes in wind by better results in water and higher prices, it gives us a slightly positive outcome for the whole segment. Green certificates had a slightly bad idea. Water or hydropower plants lost those green certificates. There are no such certificates available anymore. And one of our wind farms reached a moment, its farm in Zagórze, which reached a moment where they cannot apply for more certificates. As for Q2, it's much better. Ebitda doubled quarter to quarter. It's due to bigger volume from water-generated energy and comparable wind volume quarter to quarter. And obviously, it was all affected by elimination of provisions for real property tax, and thus Ebitda doubled due to all these factors as regards renewable sources of energy. Here, another segment that we started talking about is generation. Very good results in the first half of 2021. Ebitda is very high, 1 billion zlotys, but like I said, this is due to one-off events, transactions for CO2 allowances. We have a positive result in the power market. If we eliminate the effects that affected the result in the previous years, it also contributes to the positive result this year, and the positive margin for energy and positive results for heat. Still, a huge part of this growth year to year is due to a contract between Nowe Jaworzno and TAURON Polska Energia. It's a contract based on the formula cost plus. And here we're dealing with a transfer of results from sales to generation. So this transfer amounts to more than 200 million zlotys. So if we eliminate this factor, these results in the generation sector would be comparable year to year as regards electric power margin. As for Q2 in the generation segment, the difference is that we don't deal with those one-off events anymore that I mentioned regarding transactions on CO2 allowances. The other factors are the same as for the whole half of the year. As for supply segment sales, what we can see, the first bar shows a negative impact of margin upon electric power, but we need to remember that this negative effect is due to two premises. First of them being the results of the previous year. Last year, in the first half of the year, the group repurchased energy from a non-operational unit in Jaworzno, and it achieved positive results on those repurchases. They were accumulated in the supply segment, but this year, in this segment, the company accumulates results under the contract between Nowe Jaworzno and TAURON Polska Energia, and they are accumulated, the cost plus contract is accumulated for the supply segment. But on the consolidated level, this result is of no importance, because if we have it in supply or in generation, it's neutral for the group. But the positive impact of margin generated on sales of electric power is due to slightly lower prices last year and contracting for this year's sales. This has a positive impact on margin on electric power. If we also look at the sales company, its results year to year are very good. We don't see any decrease of results, which is quite significant in the context of the second quarter of 2021, where the Ebitda results in supply segment is lower than the one we could have expected from the very results of the supply company alone, which is due to those one-off events from last year and repurchase and the contract between Nowe Jaworzno and TAURON Polska Energia. As for mining segment, what we deal with here is a positive tendency of increased volume of energy sold with a slightly worse price. In the first half, there was oversupplies of coal, specifically in mid-size grades and fine coals, something that has also had impact on the result was bigger allocation of costs related to a relatively smaller amount of coal being put aside as inventory. Therefore, Ebitda half year to half year is a little bit smaller this year. As for the second quarter in the mining segment, we have similar factors, a slightly better volume of coal sold, and the negative impact of the price reduction, and additionally the results are worsened by the issue of bigger allocation of costs in the results, with decreased amount of coal that is put aside as inventory. As for debt and financing, we have a stable situation in the group. Our liquidity is very good. Almost 5 billion zlotys available. The indebtedness ratio is very good as compared to previous years, which shows the very good position and financial standing of the group. The results are due significantly to a program with a maturity date in December 2022, and here the group is actively involved in negotiations with a multilateral bank concerning new financing. We've also started preparation work to get new financing on the domestic market, and in the coming weeks and months we can expect information from the group on refinancing that program that is going to be mature in December 2022, amounting to 6 billion zlotys. So much for the segments and financial results. Now a small piece of information on investments in the group. I will give the floor back to Mr. Topolski. As for investments in the distribution segment, there's a slight increase. 992 million has been spent, and we should mainly note that this concerns new connections and new power. and this concerns connection of prosumers, photovoltaic installations, and new connections for new facilities, big industrial facilities, but also households. As for refurbishing and recovery of assets, we have spent almost 400 million zlotys on that. As for generation, we see a drop from 693 million to 114, and this is mainly due to the outlines which are about to come to an end and concern adjustment to the BAT requirements. And in Jaworzno, in finishing the 910 unit, 13 million zlotys were the drops in the first half compared to the previous year. The difference is more than 450 million. As for heat, we have spent for connecting new facilities and new off-takers, that's 9 million, and refurbishment and maintenance of heat system is 7 million. As for investments in renewable energy sources, we see an increase. It's not a big one because the development processes, from starting a development process until starting construction, it requires time. It's not as dynamic, but we can already see it, like a wind farm in Piotrków, 30 megawatt. We've spent 13 million, and Choszczno 1 and Choszczno 2 wind farms, 2 million zlotys in the first half of this year. As for mining, it's comparable to the first half of the previous year. The significant outlays involve preparation of production, which is 70 million zlotys, and like I said before, an increase in consumption of energy and in generation forced us to increase the amount of coal supplies to our units, and therefore we need to prepare production capacity, because we have been observing this trend for quite some time now, hence the largest outlays in this sector. And construction of Grzegorz shaft and level 800 in Janina coal mine. For Grzegorz shaft, it's mainly maintenance until resolution of dispute with the general contractor, and as for level 800 is the final stage of investment, and we spent 3 million zlotys on that. Then IT investments for broadband internet, almost 50 million zlotys for the POP C3 program, and other investments related IT, gas and powered engines that's 9 million zlotys, and lighting maintenance and expansion, it's 15 million zlotys. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the presentation. Now let us move on to questions. I browsed through the questions during the presentation. There's quite a lot of them related to the new power unit in Jaworzno, so maybe let us answer these questions, because I think half of the questions you've asked concerns this situation in Jaworzno. Question 1. What are the plans regarding further development of Jaworzno? Are you planning to enter with a capital to Rafako company in order to finalize the work and to launch and commission the power plant? And a similar question, another one, is TAURON planning to be an investor in Rafako? And one second, I'm just trying to find another similar question. What's the level of negotiations with Rafako regarding repairment of the unit in Jaworzno? Is Rafako going to finalize it, or is it going to be carried out by another entity? Is year 2022 a realistic date of returning it to functionality? And one more question, taking into account the failure of 910 unit in Jaworzno, can TAURON increase production if the situation on the market and export favor it? I will try and answer these questions, ladies and gentlemen. As for Jaworzno power plant, our main goal of TAURON Group is to make it operational again. I want to remind you that it was commissioned on the 3rd of November 2019 until June, this year, where there was a failure. So when looking at this situation, the most important goal for us is to repair the failures and to relaunch the unit, make it operational again. According to today's situation with Rafako, we are in the process of mediation involving the General Prosecutor's Office, and it's ongoing. Based on mediation advances, there's been a schedule presented on removal of failures, which has been communicated to the market. By 25th of February 2022 as the date of recommissioning the 910 unit in Jaworzno. For now, there are no confirmed premises that this date is somehow endangered, regardless of the fact that the dispute is ongoing and the mediations are ongoing. Where we're talking about expectations of Rafako that are published by the media regarding our involvement, capital involvement, I can announce that TAURON has not carried out any significant negotiations concerning such an involvement. Our strategy does not provide for investment in construction on engineering and construction companies. Our goal is to make the unit operational again. So as for today, we are not planning any capital involvement in Rafako, which is supposedly to be a condition for continuation of Rafako works to remove the failure. But these works are ongoing, so the information that Rafako leaves the site has not actually materialized. So we can say that the date of the 25th of February is going to be maintained. Is TAURON planning to transfer the new unit? And yes, it is taken into account. We assume that the deadlines, based on the assumptions of the Ministry of State-Owned Assets, regarding transfer of generation units based on coal to NABE, is the end of next year. It's going to be met, this deadline, and by that time I think that the unit in Jaworzno will have operated for several months. So we're not envisaging any disturbances in this process. Thank you. We have more questions concerning Rafako and Jaworzno. Now, due to the fact that the Jaworzno unit has stopped energy generation, should we expect losses on Ebitda in the third and fourth quarter of 2021 regarding sales Ebitda? And one more question. Just a second. In the current price situation, consecutive records are going to change the and regarding the situation in Jaworzno, is it going to change some the results as presented in the communication? As for the first question, like I said before during the presentation, it is a kind of a transfer of results between generation and supply, which is due to a contract concluded between TAURON Polska Energia and Nowe Jaworzno. As for the question whether it is going to affect the supply segment's results, well, if we stick to the formula of the presentation, these results are going to affect significantly the supply segment, but from the point of view of consolidated results for the whole group, this will not be of any significance. As for the second part, are we going to change it? Well, yeah, in the communication, in the current report, we provided the estimated value of loss of the group due to this stoppage of the unit. If there are any premises to this, the group will recalculate the loss if we know the final deadline of the repairment and what the repurchase market is going to look throughout that time. We will adjust this value. However, looking at the assets we have in the group, we can say that at the moment when we lose funds on potential higher prices of repurchase from Jaworzno, these units from TAURON generation could take advantage of higher energy prices. Obviously, if we assume that there's a positive tendency on CET, so that energy prices are growing, but not necessarily meaning that. Well, like I said, the energy price grows, but CO2 prices do not go up. So this is a positive CDS. If we have this situation, then the part of the units in the conventional area will be able to generate a higher margin that will be consumed by the repurchase of energy from Nowe Jaworzno. Thank you. I think we are going to return to other questions. I think we have abundantly discussed the situation in Jaworzno. How does the management board assess the Ebitda in distribution for 2021 for the end? What are, in the management board's opinion, what are they going to be the volumes and the tariffs in the coming quarters? As for distribution, as we have shown, the results were quite good. The volumes were significantly higher. The results of the second half of the year will depend to a large degree to the volume of distributed energy. So the answer here depends to a large degree on the next wave of the pandemic. Is it going to affect the consumption of energy, or is the level of distributed energy going to be maintained at such a high level as in the previous quarters, or is there going to be a slowdown? For now, based on current information from the government it seems there's not going to be another lockdown and limitation to business activities, and therefore volumes should be at significantly good level. So I think that the results in distribution should be quite stable in the second half of the year. Thank you. Another question: is TAURON expecting that sales and mining will reduce the debt of the company? Are the assets and part of the assets are going to be transferred to NABE? Is it going to reduce the debt of the company? Well, first of all, we need to separate two things. One thing is sales of TAURON mining, and the other issue is NABE. These are two separate processes. In governmental programs, they are separated, these two potential sales. So first, I will refer to TAURON mining, and then I will say a few words about NABE and TAURON generation and coal-fired units in TAURON generation. As for TAURON mining, yesterday we signed a letter of intent with the Treasury, which will allow us to start works on disposal of shares in this area. Then we'll have to find the assessor, and based on the pricing of the assets, it will be sold to the Treasury. But before the transaction is finalized, pre-notification process is going to be crucial, and the Commission has to approve the program for Poland regarding mining, obviously. As for the pricing, the appraisal, its level obviously is of some importance, and taking into account how it's acknowledged, how the loans granted to this area are acknowledged in the books, and the loss of value of the segment, if we take that into account, we should not expect very high appraisal. And therefore, I think we should also take into account the adjustments in the balance sheet regarding the loans. So I think that the company will be, the debt will be eliminated at the moment of disposal. But when we look at that level of debt in the group, I would not assume any significant change of indebtedness for the whole group at the consolidated level after this transaction. And a few words regarding NABE. Obviously here the situation is similar, but we are at a very preliminary level. There's no letter of intent signed between us and the Treasury. For now, we're in the process of selecting a joint contractor, and in this respect, an agreement has been signed, and we're going to select an entity, an advisor, to support both the government and the energy sector companies in the preparation to spin off those assets and to finalize the concept of the spin-off. We should assume probably that, like in the mining company, that we will have these assets appraised. But when we look at the level of adjustments in the financial statements, the appraisal of this segment is significantly different than the segment of mining. So this might affect potential disposal of coal-fired power units. It may affect the net result at the group level. What are the main factors of risk for distribution business line in 2021 and 2022? Like Mr. Krzysztof Surma has already mentioned, when we talk about 2021, the risk that we identify is merely the volume risk. The prices are approved in the tariffs. They're not going to be changed until the end of the year. So only the volume-related risk is significant, which might be related to the fourth lockdown if it appears. It's not assumed in the projections, a government projection, but if we see the dynamics of development of economy, we see that this risk seems to be mitigated. As for 2022, this risk, regulatory risk, let me remind you that 2021 and consecutive years are not covered by a set regulatory model. In 2021, there was a model, a transition model for distribution only for 1 year, and until today there have been ongoing works on the model for consecutive years. So we worry this model might not be prepared in a way that it might provide a basis for the consecutive 5 years, for instance, for the functioning of distribution period. There probably will be another transition period for 2022, and this is the main risk factor, specifically the level of the rate of return on investment, on invested capital, and the rates are going to be set for 2022. And all the cost factors should be taken into account by the president of the Energy Regulation Authority. And from 2021, we have a regulatory account where all the deviations are compensated in consecutive tariffs. So in R+2 years, so the regulator is not worried about modeling these areas regarding costs. They should be transferred into tariffs according to the model. One more question regarding Jaworzno. Is TAURON planning to transfer to NABE the new unit to Jaworzno, from Jaworzno to NABE, together with the contract that generates the losses? Is it going to remain in, or is the contract going to remain in TAURON after these assets are spinned off? The main assumption in this respect is to dissolve the contract before transferring the assets to NABE. The key here is to elaborate the program with NABE and transferring the assets, but once it's done, or before it's done, we're planning to dissolve this contract. We have ongoing works regarding purchase of shares in Nowe Jaworzno by an investor. It's one of the determinants regarding the possibility of dissolving the contract before transfer to NABE. Another question regarding fine coal. Now, at a higher level of generation of energy from coal, do we still have oversupply of fine coals? Is there a risk that there will be not enough resource from Polish coal mines? Is it going to affect TAURON's prices? For now, we still have oversupply. Like we said during the conference for Q1, due to the pandemic in 2022, there was a drop in energy demand, so there's quite high inventory of coal in heaps and by power generation units and at coal mines. So we had oversupply of thermal coal, indeed. However, today's situation of increased production leads to these oversupplies being reduced. So we hope that by the end of the year, we will be at the normal, acceptable level due or related to the requirements regarding inventory level. So we are planning to reduce the inventory to normal level for TAURON. And like I said, production and investments in workings and preparation of production should generate production of enough coal, of increased production as it was in the first half. We are not expecting these dynamics to change even further. We are planning these increased dynamics compared to 2022 should be the same as in the first half of the year, and we are prepared to secure our thermal coal supplies from our own mining. So this makes us protects us against changes of price in the whole country. But obviously, when we look at the whole country, we see increase in prices of coal in other ports and in the bids. But these dynamics are mainly related not to thermal coal, because thermal coal, the price dropped actually for this coal as compared to half one of 2020. This will change probably soon, but from the point of view of TAURON, it's not significant because our production is secured for our own purposes. In a longer perspective, we assume that the coal price path will be growing, but the dynamics are hard to determine due to significant changes of the situation on the Polish and European market as for the level of demand for energy. Thank you. Another question concerning discussions with the Energy Regulation Authority. What's the situation about the new tariff? Are we going to can we expect a new 5-year model or another transition solution? Like I said before, I would rather expect another temporary solution for 1 year. The level of negotiations is not finalized yet, so we don't expect a 5-year model, but it's not due to the relations between operators and the regulator, but it's due to the volatility of the market, and the president of the Energy Regulation Authority sees that there's a significant change of relations between volumes and prices. He is going to rather be reluctant about a 5-year plan. I think he will be more flexible, so we're expecting rather another 1-year model for 2022. And another question regarding the price or regulated prices of energy. What do you expect from regulated energy prices for 2022? Will the regulator take into account the whole increase of costs of energy in the new tariff? Can we add anything? Probably tariff G in retail supply. I assume that the president, first of all, we're in the phase of preparation of a tariff application. So the first issue is that we should look at what happened on the market as compared to the previous year. We see an increase in demand of energy, so it's hard to forget about that when you file applications regarding tariff. So we know that the president of the Energy Regulation Authority expects some increase, but the talks between the president and of the regulator and energy companies, including TAURON, will be carried out in autumn. And after we finalize contracts for energy, and when we file application at the end of October, we will know a little bit more about the size of the change, but we need to observe the market and see the changes of prices year to year. We're about to finish the conference. So one last question, which might cause a future increase of CDS on term market? Are there any chances that this might happen in the future? Well, obviously, like I said, we're dealing with a significant increase of CDS in the coming years, where CO2 prices did not go up, but electricity prices went up. So there's a chance it might happen, but to a large degree, it depends on a few factors, namely the development of renewable sources of energy in the country and the level of weather conditions, of hydrological conditions. It all depends on how much wind and how much water we have. This will translate into the level of energy generated from renewables. And another thing is the level of prosumer installations. Then prices in the neighboring countries. We had a situation that we did not experience in the previous years, much higher prices in Germany than on the wholesale market in Poland. So reduced imports or no imports and exports of energy from Poland. These two factors might, to a large degree, determine the level of CDS in the coming years. When the prices of energy on the Western markets and the demand in Poland maintain at a stable level, there's a chance that the units that complete the system, like coal-fired units in TAURON, will result in a situation where CDS is slightly higher than what we observed in the previous quarters, because in the first and second quarter there was a negative CDS on the spot market and on the term market, and this results in a situation where units, class 200 units, were forced to be operational. But then if CDS changes, we can expect a bigger generation by these units. It will depend on the situation in neighboring countries and the decision in Germany on switching off nuclear power plants. If they decide to do that, probably high prices of energy will maintain in Germany for a longer period, which will translate into higher CDS in Poland. This was the last question. Thank you very much for your participation. Let me remind you that we'd like to invite you to another question shortly after publication of the report for Q3 2021. Obviously, the investors and analysts and the media, you have at your disposal the teams of for investor relations. Thank you very much. And